He eschewed a number of the so-called gentlemanly pursuits, but he had loved the drawing room where his mother had once played the spinet. He had a penchant for fine brandy after the hunt, for sleek Georgian columns that stood graceful sentinel. He had built South Seas with his father and brother. He had tended the fields along with the freed blacks and Indians. The plantation had cost them blood and sweat and tears, and he'd die before. He sighed. When the fight came, he'd be ready. But he couldn't believe that the Yankees were all damned cowards, or that it would be all over in a few months. He had sailed into too many northern ports to live with such a delusion. It was cold on the battery. Why he continued to stare seaward, facing the brisk breeze of winter he didn't know. He should seek shelter within his comfortable master cabin aboard the Jenni-Lyn. A good tot of brandy, and he could forget the portent of things to come. Something, some slight movement, attracted his attention northward along the battery. A woman stood there, a silhouette framed by the harbor light and the glow of the moon. She was too far away for him to have actually heard her. The movement alone must have caught his eye. She stood perfectly still now, her attention focused on Fort Moultrie, a Union outpost. First curiosity, then irritation, compelled him to move toward her. The hour was approaching midnight. No respectable woman would be alone on the harbor at this time. Yet as he closed the distance between them in a long-legged stride, he discovered to his surprise that she could be no common harlot. Her clothing was far too rich. Beneath a mantle of deep black velvet, she wore a silk receiving dress in shimmering silver pearl. The belle of her skirt informed him that her crinoline was of the latest fashion, as was the waterfall effect of her honey-blonde hair. She was a lady of consequence, and yet she was alone in the darkness when even some good men were so filled with bourbon that they were potential rapists and thieves. He came to an abrupt halt within feet of where she stood, and she remained still, shivering against the cold. Brent uttered a curse of exasperation beneath his breath. He was not taken in by the lures of the female sex. He had known too many women, both ladies and harlots, not to realize that most members of the gentler sex were capable of conducting themselves like spitting alley cats. The finest drawing-room tactics in the world couldn't always hide the claws of some of the female sex. In fact, he thought a bit dryly, he preferred the company of a good, honest whore over that of the southern belles who were determined, with wide-eyed innocence, to drag him into their bedrooms. But he had been raised in the gallant South, and he couldn't leave a woman standing alone on the battery when the streets were full of overzealous revelers. She might deserve whatever came her way, but, hell, he had to find out what she was doing. It would plague his conscience if something happened to her. "Madam," he began, only to stop short when she whirled to him, emitting a startled cry of alarm, obviously shocked to have her silent vigil broken. It was apparent she had thought herself alone. And as she turned, he discovered that she was incredibly beautiful. Stunning blue eyes as dark and turbulent as the night sea met his, eyes that hypnotized, framed by lashes of darkest midnight velvet. Her nose was small and straight, set between high cheekbones in the slender face of an aristocrat. Her mouth, ruby red from the cold, was compressed in a grim line, yet it gave hint of defined fullness and passion. She was one cat he'd be glad to meet in the night, no matter how sharp her claws. "Madam," he began again, as a strong breeze whipped in from the sea. The wind caught the balloon of crinoline and skirts, and before he could say anything else, he found himself reaching out to fold her swaying form into his arms before she could plummet to the icy waters below the wall. She was very light and very, very cold in his arms. As he held her, he heard a sound that was part whimper, part sigh. Her face turned parchment white, and her slight body went limp. "Jesus," he murmured, his tone harsh with both concern and irritation. He should have left her alone.